Seconds.
We good?
Got it.
The labor system that took shape
We
in the
good,
19th
man.
century developed coercive means to ensure that cotton remained king. It was called convict
We're
leasing.
live.
Get arrested on a minor charge or a trumped-up charge, you could find yourself locked up and then hired out to a corporation bidding on inmate labor. The pipeline from prisons to profits in this country has deep roots.
The aftermath of slavery was in some ways worse than slavery itself. Unlike before, when someone who owned you, driving you too hard was counterproductive because you would lose your investment. Convict leasing was different. You could get them cheaper, and if you actually drove them to death, there was more where that came from.
In the 13th Amendment, which ends the institution of slavery, of course, there is a loophole. Convicts who have been convicted of a crime, they actually can be forced to work for free.
In Alabama in 1850, 99% of the people who were incarcerated were white. In Alabama by the 1880s, 85% of the people incarcerated were black. So we could have a debate about how many of those black people were actually innocent, or we could have a conversation about the use of the criminal justice system to target both the innocent and the guilty alike. That continues all the way to the present, where even today, about just under 40% of the nation's prisoners are black, and yet the African-American population is about 13%. They are snatching up bodies everywhere to fuel this system.
The idea in which more money can be made out of their incarceration is still very much part of our criminal justice system.
Zoom meeting. Hello and welcome to the Decarcerate Louisiana debriefing of HB 196, the Slavery Abolition Bill. Today we are going to be talking with the people who testified at the hearing and heard the speakers, the representatives speak their piece. We are going to debrief the circumstances, play some clips from that particular event, and discuss them throughout the next hour. My name is Max Parthas. I'm the host of Abolition Today, the co-director for state operations for the Abolish Slavery National Network, and I'm here at the Paul Cuffey Abolitionist Center in Sumter, South Carolina, streaming live. So thank you to our participants for being here today, and thank you for our viewers tuning in now and later on during the recording. With that being said, I'm going to pass the mic to start off to the lead organizer of Decarcerate Louisiana, Brother Curtis Davis.
Good afternoon, family. How you doing? I'm Curtis Davis, Executive Director of Decarcerate Louisiana Freedom Movement. We're a grassroots human rights organization dedicated or tasked with the really serious obligation of making sure that our brothers and sisters or the human nature or human beings are not treated subhumanly or beneath human decency anywhere on the planet Earth, starting principally with the state of Louisiana. I served 25 years, 9 months, and 11 days in Angola prison on the last slave plantation, real exiled slave plantation on the planet Earth. I learned a lot about what it meant to be treated as something of chattel, some type of property. While I was there, I was considered property of the state of Louisiana. And it was a violation to the human soul that you guys could never, ever believe. So my brothers, after I got out of prison in 2016, Malik and Ilamba, inside of the prison system, started and founded an organization that would be dedicated to actually uprooting the binary coding that's put into our Constitution, that's put into our corporate policies, our charter policies, our municipal policies that advantage the white race against the Black race. So they decided that we needed to actually come together with a serious cause to say that we're going to stop slavery for real. Slavery has never been abolished. They say that slavery was abolished after the Emancipation Proclamation, but what really happened was it was codified into the law. Slavery has been abolished except for those duly convicted of a crime. And historically, that meant that, okay, if we can get them back into the criminal justice system, that means that we theoretically de facto have them back into slavery. And so we've been fighting our civil rights fights, and we've been fighting for our voting rights. But what we haven't understood that the real fight for racial equity inside of the United States of America can never be won unless we actually uproot the binary coding of racism, institutional racism that is inside of each and every one of the constitutions of the states all across the United States of America. On May 11th, we had an opportunity to take our bill, House Bill 196, to the Louisiana legislature and ask them to allow the people of Louisiana to give us an opportunity to decide whether or not finally in 2021, our people still wanted to continue the practice of slavery inside of our particular state. Previously, other states had won their to take out the slavery exception clause. Colorado and Utah and New Jersey and various other states are continually fighting this issue. Louisiana was the first state to actually lose in the committee hearing because most people really don't understand that this is the final real battleground for the Confederacy, just like it was during the Civil War. They had 9 Republicans that decided, or 8 Republicans and 1 independent that decided, all white men, that they would still have slavery in the state of Louisiana, and they voted for this 9-5. We wanted to take tonight as an opportunity to let the public know what really happened, what this actually means, and how we plan to combat it in the future. We have Max Farthus, who has been a guide and a mentor for all of us because they're working across the whole United States to end this terrible, immoral practice. And we wanted you guys, the viewing public, to really understand that we are fighting this cause, not just for ourselves, but for all of us. Slavery should not exist in the United States or anywhere in the world. And this is 2021 and not 1821. So with that said, I want to turn it back over to the moderator so that we can go back over what actually happened on May 11th to let the people that we fight for understand what really happened and what we need to do about it.
Thank you very much, Brother Curtis. I have prepared some clips from the representative's own mouths that we can listen to and kind of break down as we go along. So what I want to do first, though, is I want to give the opportunity for you to know who voted no and decided that they wanted slavery to be legal in the state of Louisiana. So that's Representative Mike Johnson, Representative Beryl Amity, Representative Michael Charles Echols, Representative Julie Emerson, Representative Lawrence Larry Freeman, Representative Nicholas Muscarello, Representative Richard Nelson, Representative Thomas A. Presley, and Representative Alan Sebo. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can play this first clip.
The problem that I have when I actually read this is I think this might be one of the most dangerous bills we've seen this session, simply because felony convictions or the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony is a misdemeanor is without hard labor. A felony conviction is with or without hard labor. I'm afraid this might open the door to a legal challenge of every felony conviction in the state of Louisiana. And that's just not a can of worms that I'm wanting to open right now. Well, I've actually run this by some criminal justice people and some staff members, and they actually agree that it may not be a slam dunk argument, but it would certainly open the door to bringing challenges to literally every felony conviction in the state of Louisiana. And I get what you're trying to do, but I don't necessarily think this is a can of worms that we need to be opening right now.
All right, anybody willing to take on this first clip and discuss it? So let me just point at Andrea Nasca then. Andrea?
Yeah. Hi, Max. My name is Andrea Nasca. I'm a volunteer
Andrea.
organizer with Decarcerate Louisiana. Thank you for moderating, Max, and thank you to our audience for being here. I'm getting this horrible feeling in my stomach right now, reliving that moment when he said that, and when he tried to basically say that that somehow that what he's saying about trying to avoid the litigation of felonies is more important than getting rid of legalized slavery in the state of Louisiana. And I think that to some degree we were kind of taken aback, because we were like, wow, he's really actually making this argument. As absurd as it seems. He also tried to argue, stop me if I'm getting ahead of myself, about him quibbling about the difference between slavery and involuntary servitude. Is that coming next, or should I address that now?
We do have a clip of that. We have a clip.
Okay, I'll hold off on that then.
All right, thank you very much, Andrea. Would anybody else like to comment on the clip that he just heard there about this most dangerous bill?
Yeah, Max, I would like to say something real quick. He said this is the most dangerous piece of legislation. The most dangerous piece of legislation is the 13th Amendment exception clause, because it continued slavery. It continued the brutalization. It continued the separation of families. It continued the psychological trauma and the free labor that they capitalize off of. That in itself is dangerous. Repairing it is not dangerous. Repairing it, putting this in, is healing. You know what I'm saying? And that's just on the surface. We're not even talking about litigation. We're talking about just ending slavery. And all we wanted him to do, him saying, oh, well, open up a can of worms. Well, a can of worms is your job. You understand? There are people who have lived in the dirt for all these years. You've put these people down in the dirt. People like myself, people like Brother Curtis, people like Brother Alamba, and countless others, millions of others, to continue to, be pro-slavery. And he tried to deflect situations that had nothing to do with what was needed, what we were putting forth. So I didn't like that statement. I was squirming in my seat as you saw me, and I really didn't respect it at all.
Thank you, Brother Laramie. I think that's a good segue into the next statement that was made. I think it caught us all off guard, and we've had some time to think about it, but let's go ahead and share it with everybody else, and we will discuss it. So hold on here, and here we go.
Thank you, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jordan, you're a very skilled legislator. I've learned a lot from you.
I don't know, but I appreciate that.
Words mean things. But this is set up in such a way that I worry that if you were to disagree and vote against this bill, it might appear to some that a vote no would be a vote yes for slavery. That's certainly not your intent. That's certainly not what would be perceived accurately, would it?
No, that's not my intent. I tell you what, I'm sure that's not your intent, but I don't know if that wouldn't be the impact about that. And I'm joking slightly, but I know.
And I meant that as a compliment to you. That you
so,
well, I mean, the law, and I appreciate where you're going, but this is being billed as an anti-slavery bill. Well, everybody up here, I would hope, is anti-slavery. The law clearly says, even with or without your change it, slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited.
All right, you heard it. As I said, this is so point, and I got a feeling Brother Curtis Davis would like to chime in on that.
I definitely need to chime in because we have to go backwards. We have to understand why the representative said that this is the most dangerous legislation. They have hundreds of bills in this legislative session. Why would he say that this is the most dangerous legislation? And why would Mr. Johnson want to qualify that a vote no would not be a vote against anti-slavery? First of all, Louisiana leads the nation in every single negative indicator that we have on social progress, period, right? There's a reason for that. There's a design in the system that makes sure that Caucasian or people that identify themselves as white have a distinct advantage over people that identify as melanated or Black, right? So this becomes dangerous first to that advantage. This is a dangerous bill to white supremacy. And no legislator in post-Obama America can be seen or can be made to appear as a white supremacist. So when they ask their constituent or their fellow representative whether or not a vote no would be a vote for against slavery, he should have been as honest as possible and let them know, yes, sir, we are calling you guys out today because we cannot continue to pretend that our disadvantage is not based on the fact that they have made these laws to disadvantage us. After slavery came the Black Codes. After the Black Codes came the crime bills, which we call the new Black Codes, that disproportionately lock up African Americans as opposed to every other race of people that are coming into contact with law enforcement, period. We needed desperately for those legislators to understand that today, in today's society, not in our grandparents' society, but in today's society, we understand the system is designed to marginalize us, that you guys are doing this on purpose, and we now understand this. This is not an opinion. Every social scientist knows why we are in the condition that we're in. And as long as these laws continue to exist, our people will continue to be disadvantaged. So I think that this is now the fight for our lives, since we know, and we are not going to settle for intellectual dishonesty anymore. We're not going to pretend that white supremacy doesn't exist or that racism is not codified into their laws. And we will be back to correct this. So, I mean, whoever else wants to speak on that issue, please do. But this was a vote for slavery. A vote against abolishing it was a vote for slavery. Thank you.
Hey, after he got permission to go ahead and vote no, that's exactly what they did. 9 of them voted no and decided that they wanted to keep slavery. So he just said to us, I hope and think that everybody here is anti-slavery. Well, that wasn't what they showed us at the end of the vote. Would anybody else like to chime in on this before our next clip?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Curtis put it perfectly with the intellectual dishonesty. This isn't a tactic that's new. It's a tactic that's been around forever. An example is during chattel slavery. What the first clip that you showed basically did is to point to the complexity of the system. Like they said, like they weren't necessarily against the bill, but they think it opens a can of worms. And then the second one, they were trying to deny being pro-slavery. Well, if we look at the era of chattel slavery, there were tons of powerful politicians, Abraham Lincoln being one of them, that did not identify as abolitionists and said that they were anti-slavery, but would point to the complexities and the unconstitutionality of abolishing slavery at that time to keep slavery intact. And this is exactly what this is. Back then, they pointed to the South, for example, the economy in the South not being able to survive. Now they're pointing to what would happen to the rest of the criminal justice system. but it's not about the complexity of the system. I have the belief wherever there's like oppressed people, they have the right to resist, whether it's, Native and Black people inside the United States, or, Palestinians fighting for their rights over there, people fighting neo-colonization in Africa. They have the right to resist the oppression that they're facing. And a common tactic, right, is to make people that are resisting look violent. Well, this was a peaceful way of resisting oppression, which was submitting a bill, going through the correct procedures. And we still saw, as Curtis and everyone else have been putting it, people voting for white supremacy and for slavery. So it's a continuation of a long battle for justice that we've been fighting.
Thank you very much. In the continuing fight with the other states that have legislation, we're going to make sure that they know that a vote no is a vote for slavery. What does it say in the Constitution? Slavery. That's exactly what you're voting for right now. Not something else, but what it says in the Constitution. All right. Unless someone wants to chime in on
Maria has
that.
her hand up.
Who? There you go.
Maria.
Oh, Maria, go ahead and speak.
Hey, and thank you, Max, for facilitating this, and thank you to everyone for chiming in and viewing this conversation. And I have to agree, what happened with that exchange was essentially a green light that was lit for them to go ahead without really feeling any type of reservations or guilt in their decision, as far as saying that we're voting for slavery or not. And it was just disappointing to hear a flexible type of answer that was really appeasing, and one thing we know for sure, when you're trying to get free, you can't necessarily appease your oppressor. There's always going to be limitations in the legitimacy of our existence just to be here. And that's really what this comes down to. And when you're really speaking about humanity being enslaved, this is the characteristics of it. This is what this institution is. And they voted for slavery. For voting no against House Bill 196, you voted for slavery at the end of the day.
Exactly. And you can't appease your oppressor, as you said, and he identified himself as an oppressor by simply voting for slavery. I mean, nothing is more pro-slavery than voting to keep it legal. With that being said, I would like, Mandy, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, just real quick. I think I'm not going to call him a representative because I don't think he's representing anyone that we care about. They did not do a job of representing their constituents when 40 people were there that were supporting the bill, none in opposition, and they voted to kill the bill. But I think his name's Mike Johnson, the one, him and Representative Jordan were talking about words mean something. We are well aware of that because since they lied to people about slavery being abolished, they've been playing a word game since then. Slavery is abolished except if you're convicted of a crime. So then you're not slaves, you're criminals. Then you're thugs. It's just an ongoing thing. What was it with Hillary Clinton? Child predators. They've been playing word games, demonizing, criminalizing, marginalizing people, the whole history of this country. So yeah, we know words mean something and we know how they've been used against us.
Thank you, Mandy. The next clip fits right in with that, word games, because that's what they did. He was very disrespectful to Representative Jordan, as well as being wrong about the point that he was making. So I'm going to go ahead and play this next clip so that you guys can hear it again, straight from the horse's mouth. Oh, I think I hit the wrong one. Pardon me.
Language that you're trying to strike is in the language, the exact language that you're trying to strike is in the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and the except.
Well, the exact,
it's close.
Close. It's close.
The U.S. Constitution says, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted.
Right.
It's similar, same concept.
Similar, but not exact. Yeah, I want to just clarify that because I think you said exactly.
And we would agree that the language, except in the latter case as punishment of a crime, the latter case is referring to the involuntary servitude. This has absolutely nothing to do with slavery. Is that correct? Do you know what the word latter means?
Absolutely. I know exactly what it means.
There's two things, slavery and involuntary servitude. So when it says, except in the latter case, it's referring to the second of the two mentioned in the list, which would be involuntary servitude, not slavery.
Right. But
grammatically, is that correct?
All right. Anyone want to comment on that?
When I played back this whole thing in my mind, as I
Yeah.
did many times since then, I said to myself, this was one of those moments where I wish I would have just stood up and said, you know, how else could you possibly characterize being in bondage and being forced to labor as anything other than slavery? And I'm sorry, but if you're trying to say that enslaving people is a just form of punishment for someone, no, we disagree wholeheartedly. So, and also when he was, because that was, he insulted, Representative Jordan, again, I wish I would have just stood up and said, you need to be more respectful. There are just so many moments where I wish I would have just, instead of sitting there being quiet, that I would have just spoke out, because I feel it could have just sort of cut through the whole thing like a knife. So like you said, Max, we came in there, speaking for myself personally, with some level of naivete or whatever, but we will not be making the same mistakes again in the future. That's for sure.
Laramie has his hand up, Max.
Go ahead, Laramie. Thank you, Andrea.
Yes, I want to go back to thank you, Max. I want to go back to how they made. Not only did he get pretty much permission from Edmund Jordan to vote this way, Edmund Jordan, if his heart was in it, being a black man, if his heart was in it, he would have stood up and said, yes, that is pro-slavery if you vote no. And I don't think it was in. And just like Mandy said, just like Mandy and Hill said, these are word games that they have played. They play this political game. That's why you don't see a lot of people that don't care about politics, because they tiptoe around the issue without ever solving it, because they're capitalizing from it. And for him to play on, and since he got that green light, now the representative knows what that means. He got the green light to play on Edmund Jordan's intelligence. He said, you know what? I got this guy. I got him. We're going to continue to make him look like a fool by saying he does not know what ladder means. And for him to say we're only talking about involuntary servitude, it's both. When you say the word ladder, but except, everything prior to that in the sentence, any kid from elementary school knows this is null and void. So that's where this comes from. This is a more issue that has put the weight and psychological trauma from the separation of families and everything onto the Black Americans here in America. And it's wrong. It is not right. A lot of people knew how long it would last, because after generation of who would capitalize, they knew who would be on the downside of it. They planned for this. They knew that they had think tanks, not only now, but then. As Brother Curtis said, there's no one who did any social experiments and whatnot, any social anything as far as finding out where these things came from. They knew where it came from then, and they know where it's going now. So him playing on his intelligence was the second straw that kind of broke the back on this bill. But the first one was letting him say, I can be anti-slavery, but still vote no, which was 100% wrong. And if you look at the clip, we were all shaking our heads like, yes, that does mean that. So that's what I wanted to say about that.
Thank you very much, Laramie. I believe Maria had her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Max. I had to start burning sage after I heard.
I saw it, man.
Because you know, when you hear their voices, their energy flows with it. So hey, I'm blocking right now, you know. Through it all, I'm protected. And you know, it's just sad whenever you see people for who they really are. Like their evilness was revealed that day. It point blank period. We saw who they were. Their masks were off. And they really came for the jugular. And one thing that I really find to be cliche with really at the core racist people is, especially when someone is bringing forward a bold piece of policy, which they claim to be the most dangerous piece of policy that came forward this session, they're going to approach them in a very condescending, microaggressive manner. And that's literally what we've seen and heard with that. Do you know what ladder means? Like, it was a very condescending, paternalistic gesture that was said to Representative Jordan. I feel like that was utterly disrespectful. I think they were just pissed off that it was a Black man, a descendant of American chattel slavery, who brought this piece of legislation forward, and it made their nerves bad. You know, and that was, you know, whenever you come at them in a posture that's disagreeable, you know, their first, well, one of their go-tos, not one of the first, but definitely one of their go-tos initially is a condescending, microaggressive approach. And to me, that's the stuff that gets under my skin, just with my own lived experiences. Because, you know, they're pissed off to see an educated Black person. They're pissed off. You know, my existence pisses you off. You're mad that we can, you know, adequately speak and read and function as a full citizen, you know, because we're supposed to be slaves. Let's not forget that we're still in community with the descendants of the enslavers. Because it was Queen Guidry that enslaved my third great grandmother. So, hey, they still got a whole bunch of Guidrys living around here. I'm not saying it's by default, but it happened. That's just a matter of fact.
Thank you, Maria. I did want to say that you're right. They were very condescending. It was insulting the way he addressed them in a ad hominem attack, logical fallacy, saying, you know, you're too dumb to know what the latter means, right? So how can you be presenting some kind of bill like this? And what he was referencing was completely wrong anyway. It says slavery and involuntary servitude. It doesn't say slavery or involuntary servitude. And so because it says slavery and involuntary servitude, it is a package deal. In the case of the latter would be slavery and involuntary servitude. And then the word games, where he's trying to make a distinction between involuntary servitude and slavery. And if you look in the Black's Law, which is the book for law, it says see slavery. Involuntary servitude, see slavery, forced slavery, these involuntary servitude, these are all the same terms. So it was word games. Before we get to the next clip, would anybody else like to speak about that?
I wanted to speak on it. Edmund Jordan, Representative Edmund Jordan, is actually an attorney. So it was condescending. It was made to be condescending, and he should have taken offense to it. Historically, Black men have always smiled in the face of white insolence or sarcasm. You know, yes, boss, I understand that it was just a joke that you're saying, and you're absolutely right. This terminology is real. Law works in a scientific way. And when they said slavery and involuntary servitude, that makes them one thing. Slavery can be a thing that you're sentenced to life. Involuntary servitude happens over an amount of years. That's why they make a distinction between them, but using the conjunction and with them makes them the same topic that we're speaking of in a sentence. So if you're talking about the latter, then you're talking about the group package of slavery and involuntary servitude, not meaning the other things that came before it, like racial discrimination, religious discrimination, ethnic, age, and so forth, right? They had a long list of things that you can be discriminated against unless duly convicted of a crime, right? So the latter part is slavery and involuntary servitude. Any basic first year law student knows that. They knew that they played a game with us that I was actually offended by. I was insulted on behalf of Representative Edmund Jordan. Even if he didn't feel insulted, I was insulted for him. And had this been 100 years ago, I would have asked him to go outside for a duel. So let's go to the next one.
All right, no doubt. Let's go ahead to the next clip. We're going to show you now what their main concerns were. So let's hold on for a second here, and I believe that's it.
It's not playing.
All right. Will we still be able to use slave labor? Anybody want to speak to that particular clip? I think that it did show their intention. What are they concerned with? They're concerned with the free labor. How is this going to affect the free labor? And multiple representatives said the same thing, echoing those comments. Let's hear from the prisons. Why haven't we heard from the prisons? What do the prisons think? And as I said on our program last night, that's like asking the slave owner what his opinion on is in ending slavery. These prisons exist because they're filled with human beings. And if you're asking them whether or not they want to become unfilled and take away all the jobs and money flow and resources, of course, the answer is going to be no. As a matter of fact, if you want them to be honest, they'll tell you, well, we want more prisons like Alabama is doing, spending $2 billion on building new prisons. So with that being said, anyone else want to chime in on that particular clip about can we still use forced labor?
I'm sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand, Max, on this
That's
thing.
all right. Just open up your mic and start talking.
It reminds me when I heard that, it reminded me of that we saw a clip of this sheriff up, I think it was in Calcasieu Parish, who I think didn't, at the time realize that he was speaking on behalf of so many other people like himself. But he was at like a press conference or something, and he was like, well, we don't really want to let go all of these. Thank you, Maria. Yeah, Cato Parish. We don't want to let them all go. Who's going to wash my car and cut my grass? We got to keep some of the quote unquote good ones. Like,
remember that, yep.
I guarantee that in the back of their minds, that's what some of these other people are thinking, though. Although, like on a much grander scale, like you said, the prison industrial complex is a multi-billion-dollar, system of enslavement and oppression and exploitation of labor. So,
yeah, it really exposes their concerns. It's really very clear what it is they're worried about. When we say people should not be subject to forced labor, involuntary servitude, or slavery, that means not subject to it. You can't tell somebody if you don't get up and go to work, as I told you just to do, making this commercial goods or doing whatever, then you're going into the hole. That's slavery, and it should be illegal. And not to mention many of the people who are unjustly incarcerated. For instance, people who have gotten 3-strike rules where they're doing life in prison for a few bits of marijuana right now. Do they deserve hard labor for the rest of their life because they had some marijuana? It just doesn't make any sense. All right, so let's go ahead and get to this final clip, and we'll talk about that one. So let me open this one to share.
Hey, Representative Johnson, do you have a question? Thank you.
Am I to understand that you are opposed to people who've been convicted of a crime and sentenced to prison? You're opposed to them working to help pay for some of the, in 2005, so it's much more now, $16,000 to $20,000 a year that each inmate costs the state. You believe that this law would change that, and they wouldn't have to, or they wouldn't have any responsibility to help contribute to the costs that they have on the rest of the law-abiding citizens of the state?
Just speak closer to your mic, please.
I guess
Yeah,
what
pull
I'm
that
wondering, and you
closer to
believe that if we take out these 3 or 4 words from the current state constitution that prohibits slavery, that no longer would those prisoners who've been convicted of a crime and sentenced to prison would be forced to work or forced to do anything to help pay for the cost of incarceration to the rest of the state?
I don't see that that's an issue.
Right, pay to stay. Anybody want to speak on that? There you go, Laramie.
Yeah, that whole, those few minutes were, very not intelligent for what he said. I mean, it was totally ridiculous. He was talking about continuing to be a capitalist, to capitalize off of, free labor. He had nothing to say about, how families felt the separation. He wanted to continue this. That's all what he said, because that's all I heard. Now, if you look at the way the testimonies were set up, I'm going to say this, because not too many people want to say it. Curtis gave his testimony. No one asked him a question. I gave my testimony. No one asked me a question. Maria gave her testimony. No one asked her a question. They only asked Mandy and Andrea. They tried to trip them up, give them problems. I can know for a fact they handled themselves very well, but for some reason, and I know the reason, because of bigotry, they did not ask us questions, because they know in our hearts we know what's going on and we know what's wrong. So they chose not to ask us questions. They didn't want to ask the guy that served 25 years as an enslaved person. They didn't want to ask the young black man with braids down his head. They didn't want to ask the intelligent and well-spoken Maria with the big afro. They didn't want to ask her any questions because of their black skin. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you, man.
Thank you, Laramie. Curtis, I see your mic is open.
Oh, definitely. Before we go any further, I want to let my Facebook family and the viewing public understand that this is a very, very serious fight, and we need your help. You can help us with resources financially by going to GoFundMe/Decarcerate Louisiana. Our opponents have millions and millions of dollars to fight against us to keep us in this condition. We are basically doing this out of pocket. We will continue our fight whether we get assistance or not, but I am praying that there is somebody out there with the financial fortitude to help us in a way that we can actually get some commercials to re-educate the public, get pamphlets. We need t-shirts. We need resources. We need money. And I'm sorry to even have to ask that, but go to GoFundMe/Decarcerate Louisiana and give whatever you can, because we're on the battlefield. It takes gas to get out there. We have to rent cars. We have to get hotels. We need to be in a legislative session at all times. So that said, I want to just comment before we go on the last thing that the representative said, and this is definitely about money. We want, at Decarcerate Louisiana Freedom Movement, we do imagine a world without prison, but we also imagine a law enforcement apparatus that works to put itself out of business. As things stand right now, as long as crime rates are high, as long as incarceration rates are high, then the law enforcement apparatuses that are tasked with dealing with these situations benefit from higher budgets, from more overtime money, from a better college situation for their children, for better cars and nicer vacations and houses. Right? We hope to de-incentivize locking people up. Right now, the more people you lock up, the more money you get paid. Just like he said, the inmates are not paying for their room and board. The states are making money, and the individual corporations are making money, and the vendors are making money. Those are the constituents of these Republicans that voted to keep slavery intact. And we're making sure that the rest of the world understands this. I'm sorry. The next person can speak on it.
Brother Rusty, I saw you had your hand up early.
Yeah, I just want to say that I feel like no one there from our side felt like we were being heard. No one there from our side felt like we were being listened to. I believe that even one of the politicians, some of us thought that he even fell asleep during the hearing. So they came with the game plan, but they're afraid. They're afraid of us. That's why the bill actually allowed the people to vote, and they know if it goes to the people, that the people they may not have conscience, they may not have a good soul, but they know the people will, and they know that in the end, we will win. We may not have won this battle, but we will win the war. And the whole hearing, it just amplifies what Martin Luther King said about how oppressors do not give their freedom to us voluntarily. It has to be taken. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Rusty. So hi, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that so the whole this is a tactic too to flip the narrative of who is like the aggressor around. So he claimed he asked Representative Edmonds if the prisoners should pay whatever the criminal justice system is costing to hold them in. But it's not about the inefficiency of the criminal justice system is not does not fall on the burden of the prisoners. So there's a lot of things you could do, right? Like first of all, crimes that are not that don't have to be crimes, like as you mentioned earlier, smoking pot. If you decriminalize that, for example, and you have a lot of people that don't go to jail, that'll drive costs lower. And if you actually address the conditions that cause other forms of crime too, you won't have a quote unquote criminal justice system that costs so much. This isn't just my opinion. Professor Shahidi at LSU, he's a statistics professor that does work on decarcerating, and I had the pleasure to reach out to him. He isn't exactly like an abolitionist as we are, but he's working on showing the inefficiencies and how much money the criminal justice system is costing, and how doing things like improving parole, for example, drives down the cost. And he makes an effort to show that a lot of people that are interested in the economy of Louisiana, for example, see the inefficiency of it and want changes to happen at the political level. Now that just means that I don't necessarily 100%, being an abolitionist, I don't 100% agree with Shahidi. I think that we need to do everything we can, and we need to have a absolutist approach to dismantling the criminal justice system, because it, like he's saying, it is very inefficient, and the burden does not fall on the prisoners, a lot of them unjustly convicted, to drive down the cost or to repay the cost.
Right. Mandy, I see your hand up. Before you want to bring in, I just want to say that Louisiana is like among the fast food restaurants, so to speak, of slavery. $20,000 a year is nothing compared to what some of these other states do. So Louisiana focuses more on quantity. So they have larger numbers of people incarcerated in order to generate more resources. But in places like New York, California, it can cost as much as $350,000 a year per person. And how exactly is an inmate supposed to pay for that through his labor? So the argument is really just a ridiculous argument to begin with. They spent a lot of time trying to mislead what we were talking about, and that included our Democratic allies who were voting yes, who pointed out things like prison labor and how much people should be paid, or talking about other bills that should apply to help with reform and things like that. We weren't there for any of that. We were there simply to take the exception clause out of the freaking Constitution and nothing more. Everything else after that is another argument. So that's what I want to say. Thank you very much. Mandy?
Yeah, Max. Well, about what one of the representatives was asking about. First of all, what do we do with all the criminals? Second of all, how are we gonna, how are they gonna help pay for their, their prison stay? Well, first of all, we are all criminals. We've all broken the law, but there are some populations that are targeted at a higher rate than others. So I don't, all of those representatives up there, at any moment, their children can be in prison, but they're not going to be targeted like these little Black children, in neighborhoods, that are arrested for having marijuana when everybody else is smoking it. And that's their children too, but they don't have to deal with that. Second of all, you don't need to be they don't need to be paying for their way in prison. Let them pay for their way out of prison. Why are they in there to begin with? Louisiana has the highest rate of prisoners per capita, but that's not even talking about life without parole. Louisiana has the highest percentage of life without parole. Probably the whole Ninth Ward is serving life without parole. It's sick. And one of those representatives was a minister. I mean, I don't even want to be anywhere near her church. And she didn't even ask questions. She just didn't even look at us. She could care less. But I wish, we have a study that we hear about a lot, the Highland Park study, and I wish I would have referenced this that day because I'm the one that they were asking those questions, like Laramie said, and it was very disrespectful. You're going to sit and wait till a white person comes up and then ask questions? That was very much disrespectful. But there's a book, and it's a report of a National Criminal Justice Commission. So this is a bipartisan study, and it's about the criminal justice system. And it's called the Highland Park study because you have one Highland Park that's a wealthy suburb of Chicago, and you have another Highland Park in Detroit. And you'll also see this Highland Park in Detroit on the news because they're also the ones that has the facial recognition cameras where they're taking pictures of people and then going and arresting them. It's like a facial recognition thing. So they're targeting people that way and convicting people that haven't even done the crime. So that's the same Highland Park, but so there's two Highland Parks, and in 1 year they studied both Highland Parks. The one that was the wealthy suburb in Chicago, didn't have any murders, robberies, and they had one rape. The low income Highland Park in the same year, there were 27 murders, 55 rapes, and 796 robberies. So first of all, why don't we invest money in people before they get to prison? We've spent so many years, this country, trying to take from the Black population. And you think overnight they're going to come back and have generational wealth when you've taken it from them their whole lives? Every one of those representatives, what did their children have? Children have generational wealth. They are able to take care of their children. They didn't have people taking it away from them. So why don't you invest money like the New Orleans People's Assembly did a study? Take money from all the, I can't even remember the numbers. I'm sure Maria could probably jump in a little bit, or Laramie, somebody, and say these numbers, but millions of dollars to the police, surveillance, prisons, and just barely a percentage to families and communities. Put some money into communities. Stop targeting the Black population. Things go on in both areas, but they are targeted. Stop and frisk. I mean, I'd be running away too if the cops stopped me if I was a Black man in this world, in this country. But then you get beat to death. So anyway,
Thank you, Mandy. I just want to say that we're running up on what is scheduled for the end of our 1 hour period. So before we get to that point, I want to say thank you for allowing me to host this event tonight. I appreciate it very much. I also want to send my prayers for the family of Ronald Green, that you get peace and justice, that this is the catalyst for change in your son's name. Thank you so much for that. And if you want to support, please donate to the Decarcerate, as he said, GoFundMe, Decarcerate Louisiana. Go to decarceratelouisiana.org, the website, and check them out there. I'm Max Parthas. You can find me at abolitiontoday.org. And also you can sign up at abolishslavery.us for the national organization. With that being said, I'm going to pass the mic to Sister Maria Harmon. If you want to have an open forum, or if you just want to give an update on where we're going to go from here, I'll go ahead and pass it on to you to do so.
Yes, thank you, Max. I just wanted to share that going forward, we're going to have more town halls across the state. First city we're going to have a town hall in is going to be in Baton Rouge. Next will be New Orleans, and then we'll go up to North Louisiana and Shreveport. So those dates and times are definitely forthcoming. And we have to keep the movement going. We have to continue to keep our people educated and spread awareness about the work that we're doing to abolish slavery. It's very critical that people understand that this act is definitely codified into law. And under Article 1, Section 3 in our state constitution, it literally says that slavery nor involuntary servitude is prohibited except for punishment of crime. And I'll pass it off to Laramie because I see his hand is
up. Yes, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Max, for being such a motivator. The first time I heard you speak, the first poem, the first the first words I heard, I said, man, this guy knows what's going on. This guy speaks from experience. He speaks from the heart. So thank you, Max. And thank all you. I'm glad to have known you guys all these months. I've never gotten this close to people in, just a few months than anybody, even when I was in the military. So I thank all you for, opening up and, just coming together for one common goal, and that's to end slavery, and teaching me more in depth, making me look more in depth of where it came from. A lot of times we find ourselves, we think we're alone as far as what we see, and surprisingly, we're not. But I just wanted to say one more thing on the giving the testimony when Curtis was giving this testimony, and when Edmund Jordan was speaking, people were playing on their cell phones. People were walking up, going in and out. I believe that was a sure sign of disrespect. Obviously they had their answers in their heads already, how they were going to vote. No matter how we answered and what we gave them, I believe they still were going to vote the way they voted. That was planned and coordinated with bigotry and racism on their minds and at the core of them. But I do know for sure that we will win in the end. And I just want to speak on the protest for tomorrow here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at the Louisiana State Capitol. This protest is 100% for putting Louisiana, especially the governor, under a microscope as far as what happened to Ronald Green. And we're all coming together. We have prison abolitionist groups. We had an East Baton Rouge Parish Prison Reform Coalition. We have the New Black Panther Party. We have the Decarcerate Louisiana. We have the People's Promise. We have multiple organizations and individuals who are coming together for one common goal. That is to show that these atrocities, a man speeding and getting pulled over, getting beat to death, that is crimes against humanity 100%. And that is the message. And I thank Max for that message. And also the Abolish Slavery National Network and Abolition Today are going to be a part of this. But that message and this bill is the root of where that comes from. As I said in my testimony, Charles Sumner said this in 1857, that if you keep slavery, you're going to bring psychological trauma, you're going to bring mass incarceration, you're going to bring arresting for no apparent reason. You just want to keep these prisons filled with people. You want to keep slavery just so you can capitalize, just so you can over sexualize the men and women that help you build this country. That is Black men and women. And that is the separation of families, the separation of families also, and the generational trauma that we have dealt with, psychological trauma that we have dealt with through generations. But it's all, we will persevere, we will win. I don't consider this a loss. This is a loss for that committee, because now there's a light shined on their situation in their life. So I thank you all. I thank you, Max, for helping us put this together. I thank Alamba, and I thank Curtis for also helping us bring all these things together. Everyone has a foot in this, and we will all win. Thank you.
Amen. All right. I want to give my final word to Brother Curtis Davis, and then I'm going to take us out with a little short song that is fitting for the moment. So, Brother Curtis Davis, the final comments for the evening.
One love, family. Remember that this is a serious fight. This is the fight for racial equity in the United States of America. I don't care where you at. We need the Roland Martins. We need the D.L. Hugleys. We need the Jay-Z's and Meek Mills of the world to look down on little old Louisiana, where it's really going down, where they really have real racism, where they have the Confederacy still operating the same as it was operating in 1860. So we need help. Go to GoFundMe, /Decarcerate Louisiana, and send some love and some light, and let us fight these people. Peace.
Thank you, everyone, for participating tonight and for your strength and endurance. And the fight is not over. As a matter of fact, they only pissed us off now. So now we're about to smack some beehives. We started off with convict leasing and Black History in 2 Minutes or Less from Brother Lewis Gates Jr. And we're going to take it out with a song from Esperanza Spalding, and it's called Land of the Free. Give me a second here. I think I put the wrong thing up. Pardon me. All right. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you again. Make sure you continue to support these wonderful activists who are fighting for everyone's freedom.
They've exonerated Dupree, but it cost him his parents and his wife, his home, his life. In the land of the free, evidently 5/5 an innocent man, but the court only saw 3. He spent 11,000 days locked away in the land of the free. The free, until we've unbound the praying hands of each innocent woman and man in these lands.